All are welcome. We're glad you found us. Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
Welcome to the Yoga Hour, offering insights and practices for spiritually consciously living today. Here's your host, Yogacharya Ellen Grace O'Brian.
Good morning and welcome to the Yoga Hour, where we talk about yoga in all its depth and breadth as a path to spiritually conscious, fulfilled living today. I am your co-host, Dr. Laurel Trujillo, and our topic today is fall in love with your practice. Spiritual teachers from many traditions urge us to have a regular meditation practice, and now even healthcare providers, physicians are giving patients the same advice. As anyone who has tried to put this wise advice into practice has experienced, it can be a challenge. In order to keep our meditation practice steady and strong, we need to find ways to fall in love with it over and over again. And today we have a wonderful opportunity to talk with a person who is well known to the Yoga Hour listeners, our regular host and director, Yogacharya Ellen Grace O'Brian. Yogacharya is as I mentioned, known to most of our listeners, I believe, and is an internationally acclaimed spiritual teacher, author, poet, and the founder and spiritual director of the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment, a Kriya Yoga meditation center with headquarters in San Jose, California. Yogacharya teaches nationally and internationally, has received several community service awards, including the 2015 Mahatma Gandhi Award for the promotion of religious pluralism. You can find out more about her writings at her website, ellengraceobrian.com, and see her teaching schedule at the CSE website, csecenter.org. Welcome, Yogacharya O'Brian, or Umaji. I'm delighted you could join me today on the Yoga Hour.
Thank you, Dr. Trujillo. It's really fun to be in conversation with you on Yoga Hour and have you lead the way. I'm delighted to have this format to be together.
So before we dive into our dialogue about falling in love with your practice, let's start with a moment of practicing what we're about to talk about, a moment of meditation, a yoga moment. Let's begin by just bringing our attention to the present moment, here and now. Let's start with our bodies and just being aware of our bodies in space, feeling what supports us. So whether we're sitting and feeling a chair, feeling the places that our body rests on the chair, or perhaps we're walking, our feet are on the ground, but just feeling our bodies in space. And then bringing our attention to that wonderful tool that's always with us, bringing our attention to our breath and just noticing as we inhale and exhale. Just noticing the natural flow of the breathing, not trying to change it. Feeling the cool air in the nostrils when we inhale, and the warm air flowing out. As we pay attention to our breath, we allow it to draw our attention within. And just feeling that we are resting within. Following our breathing and resting within. And as we rest within, feeling that connection to our higher true self. Feeling that connection to supreme consciousness, to that one reality, feeling that connection to all. And resting there, resting in that core of our being, resting in the source and substance of all that is, feeling it to be within us, between us, and all around us. And as we rest there, we may notice thoughts or feelings as they arise, and realize we can watch them. Watch them as they arise, and watch them as they pass away. Just resting in those qualities of that oneness, that peace, that connection. And allowing that peace to pervade the mental field, the emotional nature, and the physical body. Imagining that even at a cellular level, we can open up and feel that peace. Abiding in that peace, we realize we can bring it with us, that it's what Yogananda described as a portable peace. We can take it with us into our day and share it with all we meet. So once again, Yogacharya Umaji, it's delightful to have you back on the Yoga Hour. And I always enjoy opening our conversations with one of your poems. Would you read one for us, please?
Oh, sure. I'm delighted to do that. I'm going to read some poems in our program this morning from my latest book of poetry that's called The Moon Reminded Me. And there are quite a few poems about meditation in this book. This one is called Satsanga, the Sanskrit word that refers to, it means a truth gathering, like a gathering, being in holy company, those who come together for spiritual study and practice. And so this is about coming together for spiritual practice. You can think of it as meditation. In the late afternoon, wind and redwoods get together to talk about the ocean. In the late afternoon, wind and redwoods get together to talk about the ocean. They are remembering mist that arrived before dawn. Call it mana or grace. The trees make a vow to stand all night so they won't miss it. So of course, for me, this poem is about the vow that we have to meditate regularly, so that we don't miss that nourishing presence that permeates our life. I live near the coast in Santa Cruz, California, and that's where the redwoods are, and the redwoods receive their nourishment, their hydration from the coastal fog. So you see them growing along the coast, and there is something that happens every afternoon here about 4 o'clock. The wind comes up, and the redwood trees move, and you can hear them. And so, of course, for me as a poet walking amongst the redwoods, it's just like they're having this conversation. And I thought about how, of course, that trees are such a beautiful image for meditation because they're so steady and they stand even though they move. There's this stillness in the presence of a tree, and this whole metaphor of taking in nourishment from the atmosphere. So when we meditate, we take in nourishment from that spiritual atmosphere, but it requires that we have a vow to that we take that stand to be present.
Absolutely. And I really love that image of the redwood trees taking a vow to be there and be awake all night, to feel that, so that they don't miss it. I just love that. That's beautiful. So one of the things I love about poetry is that it really can cut straight to the heart, really can bring us straight to our hearts, cutting through thought and distraction, and often provides an aha moment. And also is a wonderful source of inspiration. So given that our topic today is falling in love with your practice, I wanted to touch a moment on the role of inspiration in falling in love with your practice. So to me, falling in love with our practice means keeping our practice alive and thriving rather than having it become rote. So why is it important to fall in love with our practice?
Well, I think that one of the main things is that we're not going to meditate unless we have a strong vow and to do it, and unless we somehow, are experiencing breakthroughs in our practice and we're experiencing higher pleasure, peace, or bliss. And one of the things I think is important to know about having a long-term practice is that it is very natural that there will be dry periods. So that caught me by surprise as a newcomer on the path. I had so much enthusiasm in the beginning. I was so excited about everything I was learning, and I had some strong experiences early on. Just learning how to quiet the mind was a strong experience. But beyond that, also just some, as they say, intimations of immortality, like just a glimpse of, oh, that's the truth of what I am. So I was having some beautiful experiences, which even Yoga Sutra, Patanjali says, some initial experiences that you have will encourage you. And so early on, most people have that, or many people do. But then it's very common to go through a time where nothing's happening. And then you kind of try to settle into your life, your routine, and you find that it's difficult to keep meditation in the forefront of your commitments. The world sort of edges in there, and so it's like, okay, well, I'll meditate later, and then later never comes. And so that is why it's important to do whatever we are inclined to do to keep our practice fresh and nourishing, finding ways to keep it ever new.
Yeah, you described it as these dry spells, and I think that's an interesting metaphor. It's an interesting way to describe it. Certainly, I've experienced that, and in a way, falling in love is trying to keep it juicy, right?
Yeah,
Even
totally.
in those times when it feels dry. When there may not be, much going on. So we started with a poem, and I talked about inspiration and how I find, poetry really inspirational. So what is the role of inspiration in helping us fall in love with our practice?
Well, I think wherever you are on the spectrum of, different kinds of yoga practice, those who are more emotionally inclined, more, heart-oriented, are probably the ones who are going to, find poetry to be an inspiration, or chanting, those devotional practices. But those who are leading with the intellect and discernment, and looking, examining the nature of consciousness, and looking in that way, will also find study to be an inspiration. So study
Mm-hmm.
of scripture, study of the lives of the mystics, all of that. So no matter what the approach, whether you're using your heart or your faculty of discernment, staying plugged in to topics related to meditation can just be a helpful reorienting tool.
No, that's great. And it's wonderful that you expanded it by saying, of course, not just, spiritual poetry, but obviously, scripture and, lives and writings of the saints, whatever whoever they might be in your tradition. So what we're talking about when we talk about falling in love with your practice is really how to keep our meditation practice steady and strong. So in the first chapter of the Yoga Sutras, we read that meditation becomes stable by devoted, persistent practice. So what does it mean to have a devoted, and I should mention that's from Raging Davis's translation of Yoga Sutra 114. So what does it mean to have a devoted, persistent practice?
Well, it means, of course, to have a steady practice, to have a daily practice, and to have a steady routine. You have to remember that the goal of meditation is to clarify the mental field. And so if our practice is not steady, if the timing of our practice, we're just kind of fitting it in here and there, or if we're infrequent in our practice, or if we're using all different kinds of techniques, then that causes the mind to be unsteady as well. So the unsteadiness in the practice contributes to unsteady mind, and it's very hard to meditate with an unsteady mind. So having a consistent, persistent practice is one of the ways that we contribute to calming the mind. And if you look at the lives of yoga masters, you see generally the ones that I have had the privilege to know and to observe, their practice and actually their lifestyle is very disciplined and very steady. And this is not because they are rigid, but because they understand the relationship of this steadiness, a calm life, a disciplined life, to having a clear mind, and then being able to be have your energy liberated, for the things that you want to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, we should also touch on, so why is it important for our meditation to become stable, right? We don't meditate, for the sake of meditation, but for self and God realization, right?
Yeah, that has to do, of course, with, as I was saying, the mind becoming calm. So that, classic definition of yoga is that, when the mental field becomes clear and calm, or sattvic, becomes luminous, then the reality of the essential self is revealed. So that's what happens in superconscious meditation, and that's what we're looking for, and that's what a steady practice contributes to. So that's not just a steady practice, it's also an intentional practice. So it's knowing why you meditate. As you mentioned, it's important to meditate, not just for the sake of meditation itself, although that can bring some benefit, but for yogis, people on the path of yoga, there's understanding what the goal of practice actually is, and that how steady practice contributes to that.
Mm-hmm. And I read the translation of Sutra 114, which talks about the meditation part of it, but 112, which is right before that, talks about the two essentials, so that having this steady meditation practice is one, and then the other one is dispassion, right? Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. That I mean, we come back to the goal in yoga meditation is purifying the mental field, so that the mind is not disturbed by thought activity, or it's called vrittis, the modifications in the mind, so that the light, or the conscious awareness of the essential self is revealed. So that particular sutra is telling us, we, through this regular steady practice of meditation, we learn how to bring our attention within to be anchored in that essential self, how to learn to observe, the mind, and learn through that we're not the mind, because we can observe it.
Right.
So we learn that anything that we can observe, we must not be that.
Right.
So that is, a gift of meditation practice. And then the part 2 that potentially gives us is this detachment, is learning, how not to let your attention and awareness become too distracted, being caught up in externals. And so it basically says, okay, here's one way you learn how to pull your attention within, be anchored within, and the other way is you learn. I like to say is learning how to be cool, in the best sense of the word. Not
Yeah.
cold but cool. You learn how to, flow through the world, paying attention, being aware, but not becoming overly involved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's beautiful. So we have time here, another few minutes before the break, and I wanted to give you a chance to share another poem with us. I'd love to hear one.
Okay, great. I think I'll share this poem about mantra, since we're talking about meditation practice, and mantra is one of the primary tools in the yoga tradition for practicing meditation. And of course, mantra is, using a mantra helps occupy the thinking mind, which tends to wander. So we anchor our concentration, our attention on a mantra, so that the mind, the attention doesn't wander, and the mantra then steadies the mind. It also, of course, purifies the mental field, but initially it's this tool for concentration, so the attention doesn't wander. So again, this is a metaphor that showed up for me when I was traveling in India, in a village. And in the village, they didn't have storefronts, but they had sort of these spontaneous carts of vegetables and goods that would appear every morning along the sides of the streets that you would walk down, and that was kind of like a farmer's market, a spontaneous marketplace. And I noticed with one vendor that his donkey had pulled the cart into the marketplace, but he of course had to have his donkey there by his side, and donkeys are known to wander around and munch on things, and there was nothing to tie this donkey to. There's no structure there. They're just parked on the village lane with their carts. And so there's a very ingenious way that they had of simply tying the front legs of the donkey together. So the donkey he was tied to himself, and he couldn't really go anywhere, but he could stay there next to his master. So that reminded me of mantra and how we restrain our wandering attention with mantra. So that is what this poem is. That's what inspired this poem, called Mantra. To keep his donkey close, the merchant ties its front legs together. Now it cannot wander. This donkey can be trusted near his neighbor's carrots. The merchant is free to work all day without worry. At dusk, he unties this tendency to wander, and together they go home. I tie the mischief of my mind with the rope of your name. It's dusk, and I'm waiting for you. Untie the knot. Let's go home.
Wow, that's just so beautiful. And thanks for that explanation about the donkey.
Yeah, and of course, the end of the poem, is about the mystical experience. Untying the knot is untying the resistance in the heart, or to the complete experience of merging, and going home is that super conscious experience. So it's a prayer. Then I tie the mischief of my mind with the rope of your name. It's dusk. I'm waiting for you. Untie the knot. Let's go home.
That's beautiful. And with that, we've come to the close of this first segment. You're listening to the Yoga Hour, and I'm joined by Yogacharya O'Brian, host and director of the show. You can find out more about Yogacharya's books on her website, ellengraceobrian.com, and find out more about her teaching schedule at the website, csecenter.org. We welcome your comments and questions. You can contact us at yogahour@unity.fm. I'm Dr. Laurel Trujillo, co-host of the Yoga Hour. When we come back from the break, we'll explore more about the different ways there are to fall in love with your practice. We'll be right back.
Experience the difference. Unity Online Radio. The voice of an awakening world.
As Unity Online Radio continues to expand its programming and outreach around the world, we depend on the generosity of listeners like you. If you enjoy the programming, please make your donation today by going to unityonlineradio.org and click on Donate. Thank you for your support.
Here's a Unity Mindful Moment with Catherine Ponder, taken from a classic talk called The Prosperous Truth, recorded at Unity of Austin in 1991.
God is extravagant supply. Get that? Extravagant. God is extravagant supply. He brings forth the best roe. He spreads a banquet table, as we saw last night, with good things on which we may feast. He overflows our cup. He opens the windows of heaven and pours out a blessing. And then this is what that Unity Correspondence Course said. Why are you satisfied with such meager living when you may have so much?
To find out more about Unity teachings, visit unity.org.
Unity is proud to announce the first ever New Thought Walden Awards, honoring 27 leaders who are helping to change the world. Some are well known, but most are unsung heroes. They care about spirituality, healing, interfaith understanding, caring for the earth, and social activism. Read about them in the September-October edition of Unity Magazine, or go online to waldenawards.com. Congratulations to all.
If you're looking to deepen your spiritual journey, Unity Magazine is your go-to source for information and inspiration. It's been beautifully redesigned and packed with interesting articles and compelling interviews from today's spiritual thought leaders. You'll find science, spirituality, and healing with a look at Eastern philosophies, meditation, as well as completely new ways to interpret the Bible. Plus, reviews on the latest spiritual books and music. Get a free trial issue at unitymagazine.org.
Tune into Everyday Attraction with Ray Zander every Friday at 12 p.m. Central here on Unity Online Radio. Take a deep dive into the teachings of Abraham and discover how to make the law of attraction work for you in your life. Each week, Ray goes into the heart of understanding the power of our emotions and how to become conscious co-creators. Learn how to release resistant thoughts and live life to the fullest. Find out more at everydayattraction.com.
Call now with your question or comment. 816-251-3555. That's 816-251-3555.
You're listening to the Yoga Hour, Living the Eternal Way with your host, Yogacharya Ellen Grace O'Brian.
Welcome back to the Yoga Hour. I'm Dr. Laurel Trujillo, co-host of the show, and I'm joined today by regular host, as well as spiritual teacher, author, and poet, Yogacharya Ellen Grace O'Brian. Yogacharya's award-winning book of poetry, published last year, is The Moon Reminded Me. In 2017, she also published a book of inspirations for spiritually conscious living called Living for the Sake of the Soul. And once again, you can find those books and find out more about her writings and her blog at her website, Ellen Grace O'Brian, and that's O'Brian with an A, OBRIAN.com. So, Yogacharya, Yumaji, let's get back to our discussion about falling in love with your practice. There's so much rich guidance in the Yoga Sutras. The sage Patanjali, who compiled these concisely presented spiritual concepts about 2,000 years ago, recognized, as we have been discussing, as anyone who has tried to meditate regularly, Patanjali recognized that there are obstacles to meditation practice, that these happen, and he listed them. So these he listed as obstacles to meditation are illness, doubt, carelessness or negligence, laziness, confusion, non-abstention or addictions, attachments, failure to make progress, and distraction of attention. Whenever I read these, it just strikes me. It's quite a list. And I have probably experienced most of these obstacles. And that is the translation of Yoga Sutra 130 is from both Roy Jean Davis and Baba Haridas. So can you tell us more about these obstacles and what we can do to overcome them?
I think it's good to anticipate them, for one thing, and to not be surprised, when we have them. Some people read that sutra and think, well, if I have any of those things, then I can't meditate. But that's not the meaning of that sutra. It's simply that these will arise in the physical body or in the mental field, and they can all be dealt with. And generally, as a general rule, it's just sort of, you look at what those obstacles are, and the antidote to them is to cultivate the opposite of what the obstacle is. So, it's interesting that he starts the list with illness, stress in the physical body, basically, and it gives you some insight into why yogis have, such an emphasis on taking care of the body, because is one of my Swami friends said, take care of it, because your body is your vehicle for enlightenment. And so yogis hold it in that way, and they don't ideally, ignore the body's needs, and they don't give it too much attention either, so it's that balance to where you're a spiritual being, but your body is your vehicle in this lifetime, so you take care of it. I was going to say that most of these obstacles, in yoga, there's the teaching about the three qualities of nature, the quality of luminosity, or sattva, the quality of heaviness or darkness, tamas guna, and this quality of activity or restlessness, rajas guna. And so those qualities are always at play in our life. they influence the body, the mind, the environment. And when you practice yoga, the goal is always to be cultivating this peaceful quality of luminosity and bringing more of that into your life, into your experience. And as I was talking earlier, having a regular, steady practice contributes to peace, to quiet, to luminosity, as opposed to distraction of attention, failure to make progress is like not having a steady carelessness, negligence. That contributes to restlessness, which is a quality of rajas guna. So when we look at the obstacles are, outpicturing of these qualities of restlessness or heaviness. They're one or the other, that those have come into ascendancy in our experience. So either restlessness or heaviness, inertia. So having a lifestyle that is more sattvic, that is more peaceful, that is more steady, that is more uplifting, all of those things in our choices of food and entertainment and how we deal with our time, how we deal with our energy, all those things are going to contribute to keeping the obstacles at bay. Otherwise, you have the rise of restlessness with rajas guna, which is distraction of attention, confusion, carelessness, doubt. Those are all related to rajas guna. And then tamas guna, confusion, addiction, attachments, and so on and so forth.
That's actually really helpful. I really appreciate that, tying it back to the three gunas, and then it gives us something else to be aware of in our self-study. When these things arise, is realizing, this obstacle, to my practice is coming more from either rajas or tamas, and then being able to look at our lives to see, well, what other things are we doing that are contributing to those, obstacles. So that's helpful.
Exactly. We really have to, meditation is not just something that we sit down and do. It's really a meditative life, a way of living. So we can't, have a rajasic lifestyle where we're running all the time, consuming, just with all this restless energy, and then expect our meditation to counterbalance that. It will to a certain extent, but also the way that we live will affect our meditation.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the ones that was interesting to me is failure to make progress as an obstacle. So it raises the question, how then can we look for progress in our meditation practice?
Well, we look for, progress in the way that we're living, just having a steady practice over time clarifies the mental field, and, we become more peaceful, and we notice some improvement in our relationships because we're not so reactive. We notice improvements in our health because we make better choices with a clarified mind. So, we look for progress in those ways, and so it's helpful to look at our life and not just try to pick our practice apart. I've been inspired by the Catholic monk Father Thomas Keating, and he wrote about he was the one who introduced meditation to Catholics all over the world, calling it centering prayer. Sort of a stealth way of introducing meditation to practicing Catholics, and he really had a lovely way of saying your time of centering prayer is your time of just showing up, for whatever it is that God has in mind for you at that time. And so, and and Paramahansa Yogananda said, make a daily appointment with God and keep it. And so when we think of that, I think it can release us from this idea, especially in the West. I don't know about other parts of the world, but we tend to be so goal oriented, so we meditate and we're looking for something to happen. So while we need to be intentional about our practice and not just sit and let the mind drift, and Father Thomas wasn't saying that either, because he used prayer very much like we use mantra with yoga. So it in a sense just to center the attention, but then just be open and in a sense just allow the divine reality to reveal itself to do, whatever is going to be the peak experience for that occasion. And I found that attitude so refreshing. And I think it's a key one, as we talk about falling in love with your practice, it's really a sense that the time can be nurturing for you if you just sit and you're open to whatever is going to be revealed, and you have a sense of your higher power, your connection to absolute reality or God, however you think of that during that time you're in a sense in the ancient way saying, "Here I am, Lord, here I am." And it can be a very deeply nourishing experience.
That's really lovely. And also it strikes me as practicing the two things we were talking about in the first segment. And not only are you practicing your steady meditation practice, but you're also not being attached to a particular thing, that's going to happen, but that openness that you talked about, just being open to the highest, experience that can happen at that moment.
And also knowing that if nothing happens that you think is spectacular at all, it's also being open to nothing that you perceive happening, and having faith that your showing up is your commitment to your relationship with the infinite, and whatever is right for you is actually occurring at the spiritual level of your being. And so it's like an underground stream that's flowing, and you may not be aware at the level of mentally cognizing, something is occurring, something's changing in my life, I'm becoming a better human being. You don't have to have any of that. You just, in a sense, need faith to understand that there is this relationship with the infinite, and meditation is a way that we honor that, we honor ourselves, and that every time we do, there is something that goes on, but whether or not that something that goes on is something that we have a cognition of, or we have an experience of, it doesn't matter, because it's what we're looking for is spiritual, which is beyond thought and beyond emotion. And so it's helpful to keep that in mind.
So we talked a little bit in the first segment about how not everybody is going to fall in love with their practice in the same way. And yoga recognizes that not everyone is the same. And so there are these 4 paths of yoga, and you talked about a couple of them, in the beginning. Can you give us a brief overview of them, and then talk about how someone from each of those temperaments might, again, fall in love with their practice in a different way?
Well, the main paths of yoga are delineated, according to, as you say, temperament types. But of course, none of us is, purely one temperament type. So we're all a mixture with one that seems to be perhaps predominant, and that even changes over time. Those who are on the path of yoga for some time experience. This is like going to another country, visiting another country. So you may identify yourself as a bhakti yogi, where you are sort of leading with your heart, with the felt sense, with emotion, to where perhaps, you're someone who enjoys poetry or chanting, worship, bringing flowers or offerings to your altar in the morning when you worship. So those are things that are natural to people who are leading with their emotional nature. And then the jnana yogis, those who are walk the path of discernment, they're walking the path of inquiry, who am I? What is this ultimate reality? They're likely to find inspiration through study of scripture, and reading the lives of illumined sages who will reveal their experiences, of study. So they're practicing the path of inquiry. And then those who are active types are going to be involved in service. For them, it's a matter of coming to understand this higher reality as the doer of all, and learning how to let go of the ego through the offerings of service, not erasing the sense of I, or coming into communion with the true I, the one reality.
Mm-hmm.
And the Raja Yogis are ones who appreciate the step-by-step methodology. And of course, many people come to the path of meditation through Raja Yoga. This is a very traditional step-by-step path of how to meditate, through practicing pranayama and learning how to focus attention and learning what samadhi is and so forth. So, there's those four main paths, but as I say, we generally include elements of all the paths, and as a Kriya Yogi, that is often been called, Kriya Yoga has often been called the path of integration, because we have all the elements in Kriya Yoga. We have devotion, we have this path of discernment and inquiry, we have service and surrender to God, and we have the elements of Raja Yoga in a systematic practice.
Absolutely. So when we talk about falling in love with our practice, if you recognized yourself in one of those descriptions of the different types of yoga, or perhaps, as you said, Umaji, there's part of them in each of us. So whichever one's kind of coming to the fore, you could, when you hit one of these dry spells in your practice, you could go back to that and get an idea from the list that you just gave of a way to fall in love with your practice. Or you can also look to one of the other paths that perhaps you haven't, explored more recently. So perhaps if you're already putting flowers on your altar and you have a bhakti temperament, you might maybe want to try to read, about the life of a saint and have that experience.
And one of the more subtle things that we haven't talked about that is really quite useful, I was thinking of Lahiri Mahashaya, the guru of Sri Yukteswar, who said in our meditation practice, we should learn to attend to prana. And he was talking about the life force, the subtle life force. And so sometimes, we can become so rote with our technique that we're not paying attention to the subtle shifts of energy in the practice. So if we learn how to tune into this pathway of energy that moves up the Sushumna, the subtle pathway for vital force, moving through all the chakras. Sometimes the prana itself will teach about interiorization, meaning that you'll become aware of your energy being centered, perhaps at the heart, the throat, or the third eye, or the crown. And so it's important not to become distracted by your own techniques. So
yes, right.
you might be doing pranayama, or you might be, chanting a mantra, but here then the prana, the energy is blooming, at one of the spiritual centers, and it's much easier if you just let go and you follow your own prana, your own energy that is kind of showing you where to put your attention, and go ahead and go with it.
Yeah, great. So we're coming toward the close of the show, and I definitely wanted to have time for another poem. So why don't we have another poem?
All right, so this one is called Ishvara Pranidhan, which is one of the steps of Kriya Yoga, which means devotion to God, or surrender to God, surrendering the false sense of ego identity, somehow the idea that we have an independent existence, that we're separate from the source. And teachings of yoga say, no, there's just one reality, and everything, including you, is an expression of that. So this is really about remembering that and having this surrendered, devotional attitude in life. And a key to that is the longing that we feel in our heart to connect. So this poem is called Ishvara Pranidhan. The ocean does not argue with the rock. It goes where it will, telling the secret again, then again, to the slow-moving cliffs, prayers written in moss, answered at dawn. Listen for the secret. Be a jagged edge falling in love, one salty kiss at a time. Be a jagged edge falling in love, one salty kiss at a time. See yourself as the shore, longing to dive in. See yourself as the wave, returning home again.
That's so beautiful. I love that line, falling in love, one salty kiss at a time.
Yeah, and of course this poem was inspired by, I like to walk along the ocean cliffs, and one day I went out there, and there had this huge rock that was kind of a little bit offshore. I mean, really a big rock, like a little tiny mountain, that the birds would roost on and everything. And one day I went out there after a storm, and the whole thing was gone. and so I thought, that's just, to me, it was just that metaphor for, of falling into the ocean, this sense of separate, there was no separate cliff, and it had been kissed by the ocean during the storm and completely disappeared.
So we have just about a minute, and I will let you have the last word. What advice, little sutra of advice, would you give to people about falling in love with their practice?
My sutra is never let your pause become a conclusion. So in other words, sometimes, it's common that, we will have an interruption to our practice. You're traveling, or you don't feel well, or there are 10,000 things that can happen that can become an interruption, and so we need to see it simply as a pause and allow us to come back to our practice. So you can expect that even if you have a steady practice, that from time to time there will be an interruption. But if you think, well, I no longer have a steady practice, and then you allow that to continue, you'll fall away from your practice. So let an interruption be a pause and not a stop.
Beautiful. And with that, you've been listening to the Yoga Hour. It's been my pleasure to share this time with you. I'm Dr. Laurel Trujillo, co-host of the Yoga Hour, and we've been discussing Fall in Love with Your Practice with Yogacharya Ellen Grace O'Brian, founder, director, and host of the Yoga Hour. Yogacharya is an internationally acclaimed spiritual teacher, author, poet, and the founder and spiritual director of Center for Spiritual Enlightenment. She has been sharing poetry with us today from her book, The Moon Reminded Me. Another recent book is Living for the Sake of the Soul, and you can find out more about her books and writings at ellengraceobrian.com. You can find out more about her teaching schedule at the CSE website, csecenter.org. Thank you so much, Yogacharya O'Brian, Umaji, for joining us today on the Yoga Hour.
It's really my pleasure. I enjoy being able to be in conversation, and want to thank all the listeners for being with us, and send my prayers and blessings your way. Also let you know that if you're listening in real time, I will be at Center for Spiritual Enlightenment this Sunday for satsang at 10 a.m. and then again at 1 in the afternoon. So I'll look forward to being with you.
And real time means today, October 11th. So the Yoga Hour is a service project for the Center for Spiritual Enlightenment, a meditation center in the Kriya Yoga tradition. CSE welcomes people from all backgrounds who are seeking self and God realization, a path to spiritually conscious, fulfilled living in today's world. Remember to subscribe to the Yoga Hour podcast at iTunes or Stitcher. And if you're enjoying the podcast, share it with a friend. Thank you to the Yoga Hour team. Obviously, the person we've had on today, regular host, founder, and director, Yogacharya O'Brian, assistant producers, Ann Hayes and Sean Smith, CSE's global media outreach manager, Holly Gray, and Jeff Comfort and Louis Pagan in the sound booth at unity.fm. I look forward to being with you again while Yogacharya O'Brian is away. Until then, remember, you carry your own healing and wholeness within you. Share your peace and joy with all you meet. Bye now.
Thank you for listening. This is Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.